Hello, everybody. Huge apologies for the late start. We're going to get the event tonight underway. Welcome to tonight's event, Black Rights Matter, Defending Equality Against the New Far Right with the one and only Shami Chakrabarti. This event is part of our Black History Month festival, which will be taking place online over the entirety of October. Our programme is part of the Liverpool Black History Month, a citywide collaboration put together by the cultural organisations of Liverpool, a collective known as COOL. I'd like to say thanks to the Lord Mayor's Office and Culture Liverpool who've supported COOL and WoW to make this our biggest Black History Month offer to date. We've got lots of events over the month, including an In Conversation with Man Booker Prize winner Marlon James. But tomorrow, we are beyond proud to welcome hip-hop musicians Keith Jones, Leroy Moore and Tony Hickman. They'll be talking to us about race, music and disability and their new Netflix series Rising Phoenix. Make sure to join us tomorrow from 7 p.m. for that. But now to tonight's event. Again, apologies for the delay. The death of George Floyd at the hands of the US police force sparked outrage across the globe in the midst of a global pandemic like no other. Protests globally ensued and real change felt possible. Yet only this week, we saw the American president tell far-right extremists, the Proud Boys, to stand down and stand by. This just after his election campaign was revealed to have strategically identified and deterred 3.5 million Black voters, helping him win his battle for the White House. And it isn't any better here in the UK, with Black and ethnic minority groups dying from coronavirus at hugely disproportionate rates. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So for our guest this evening, Shami Chakrabarti is a human rights lawyer and campaigner, Labour peer, and was the Shadow Attorney General for England and Wales from September 2016 to April 2020. She was the Director of Liberty, the National Council for Civil Liberties, and has written the books on liberty and of women. She'll be looking at human rights and defending equality against the far right tonight. So without any further wait, please welcome the one and only Shami Chakrabarti. Hi, Shami.
Hi, Emma. Thanks so much, and thanks to everybody for their patience. And it's really great to be back with everyone. So solidarity. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah, I was going to say. So you're going to lead us on a keynote speech, and there's a video. And
I am. So welcome back to everyone. Welcome to this important event. This important festival in Liverpool. It's my absolute privilege to be giving this talk virtually at such a terrifying time for our country and for the world. Last weekend, we learned of the launch of a new political party. It claims to be neither right nor left. It further claims that such labels are outmoded. But the code and cues were there nonetheless. Sources said it would be a new UKIP set up to fight the culture wars. With slogans like "All Lives Matter," its founder picks up universalist language when it's convenient, whilst painting his personal privilege as persecution and the history of the British Empire in sepia tones of perfect tolerance and inclusion. It's as if people were never enslaved, exploited, and otherwise oppressed. Over there and over here for hundreds of years, with continuing consequences in structural inequality. I've called my talk Black Rights Matter, partly as a deliberate counter to those who suggest that to even talk about the rights, freedoms and experience of any particular group, women, Black people and so on, must come at the expense of everyone else. And that's obviously not true. But also because terms like black letter and black and white can be used to describe important, clear and hard-edged legal protections that in the end must be there to protect the vulnerable of whatever category from abuses of power. Of course, all lives matter, but colonisation, slavery, racism, misogyny, homophobia, and all the other forms of entitled bigotry that ultimately feed fascism were, and sadly are, still so real. So we must continually take particular time and care to examine history, experience, and injustice. Let me put it like this. We were having today's discussion, not via the imperfect internet, but in a physical venue, only accessible via a tall set of steps. Some of us would be physically barred. So many of us would seek to persuade, petition, and even protest to the organisers that a different or alternative means of access, another door, lift, or ramp must be found. Because the inclusion, participation, and rights of people in wheelchairs or who would otherwise struggle with that staircase are essential. Because disabled lives and rights matter. Equal treatment isn't always about treating everyone the same. Sometimes it requires treating people differently with sensitivity to their experience, challenges, and needs. What would the new far right argue in that situation? That all rights matter, and so we are woke, whining, snowflakes, or making special pleadings? Or perhaps that it can't be discrimination if everyone is asked to walk up the same staircase, no matter the different journeys that brought us here and the different barriers that we've had and still have to overcome. We all understand in our family and social lives the need to take care of and enhance the opportunities of everyone we love, to level the playing field. So why shouldn't we treat our wider human family in the same way? The sanitizing of history as an important, if sensitive thing to consider this month of all months, in this year of all years. The argument was played out on the streets of our towns and cities a few months ago, when the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement led people once more to look at the statues of slave traders and colonizers that sit as heirlooms for some people and perpetual insult for others. Public space and art should surely be shared and curated, just like space and art in a museum or gallery. There'd be no need to tear down statues if space, art, and demonstrations of power and entitlement had been better and more sensitively debated and navigated long ago. And those who want to weaponize this in a so-called culture war should consider whether ordinary working people over here, let alone over there, might not have a few legitimate arguments, historical arguments, with those who built their power, fortunes, and statues on the hard labour and exploitation of others. Divide and rule is the oldest trick in the far-right book, as is pretending that left-right labels are outdated and that culture wars should replace wider collective struggles for greater equality and universal human rights. Which brings me out of empire to the post-World War II moments and the liberation struggles during the first real opportunity to build something better than exploitation and oppression for the majority of people on the planet. It's no surprise or coincidence that the Universal Declaration on Human Rights contains both civil and political freedoms and social and economic rights. After the fascist darkness that was defeated in the mid-1940s came a new hope of a settlement of rights and freedoms to reflect, protect, and celebrate everything that human beings need to survive, thrive, and give of their potential to their friends, neighbours, and wider human family. That framework was forged in hard history. So we have rights against torture and slavery, and for fair trials, privacy and family life, freedoms of conscience and speech. But we can't live and thrive without other rights too, to food, shelter, and healthcare, and to education, work, and cultural life. But the most important human right of all, in my opinion at least, is the right to equal treatment or against discrimination. Why? Because so many other rights must be constantly balanced against each other. And when we necessarily compromise our freedoms, not least in the middle of a deadly pandemic, it's just so easy, isn't it, to trade away the rights of minorities and otherwise vulnerable people. And because if we really practiced equal treatment, not just in opening the door to everyone, but finding ways to help them up the stairs as well, there would be no torture, no slavery or arbitrary detention, and everyone would obviously share food, shelter, healthcare, and so on. That's why those unthinking defenders of the statues of slave traders, the one-sided and racist histories and colonized curriculum cause such hurt and offence to so many people. The new far-right cry is for freedom of speech, but only ever as a one-way street, the freedom to be abusive in the name of online patriotism, but not freedom for people who don't command column inches in major media outlets to express themselves peacefully in protest on the streets, unless they're far-right statue defenders, that is. It's a fact of life, it seems to me, that everyone loves their own human rights, and those are their friends and their family. It's just other people's that are sometimes a little bit harder to swallow. So, equal treatment isn't just an important test of a decent, human rights respecting society, it's an important test of people's ideas and arguments as well. Take the handling of the pandemic. Because this cruel virus transmits from person to person, we have to adopt various forms of that harsh thing called social distancing in response. But some people have suffered so much more than others over the last 6 months. The instruction to stay at home if you can and go to work if you must begs the questions of who can and who must, and the economic reasons why that is. The government understandably took powers to restrict social gatherings, but where were the additional powers and resources to ensure that those forced to work in warehouses, call centres, and on building sites are being properly physically and financially protected? Where were the powers to take over factories for the production of protective equipment, or private labs for the mass production and processing of vital tests for everyone? And as for those people who complain about losing the right to take their Land Rovers and their Labradors to their country retreats whenever they want, I ask them to consider the disproportionate death rate of black and brown health, care, cleaning and other public service workers, some sent to the front line of infection, sometimes with only black bin liners for protection. If all lives matter, why must some pay so much higher a price in terms of liberty, livelihood, and even life itself? The truth is, there is no vaguely credible, let alone colourful British history without black history, including that of exploration and migration, not least in its role in building and delivering our greatest ever national treasure, the NHS. But far-right politics is about turning ordinary people against each other, lest they otherwise come together to demand better homes, working conditions, public services, and quality of life for all. And turning people against each other, first by othering, and then by demonizing strangers, outsiders, and migrants, is a perfect distraction, not least from the unjust mishandling of a catastrophic pandemic. So now, we hear that refugees are to be deterred from seeking safety in Britain with the threat of being sent to offshore outposts, perhaps oil rigs or islands in the South Atlantic, while some people hide their money offshore to avoid paying tax. The UK government now proposes to transport some of the most vulnerable people offshore to avoid its own responsibilities under the Refugee Convention, that most sacred covenant of protection that came out of the worst horrors of World War II. Before any society anywhere can respect human rights or even build democracy, it must have firm foundations in the rule of law, both international and domestic. That's law that should bind everyone equally, from prime ministers and their advisors to the rest of us, at home, work, and on the street, which is why it's so important that those who enforce the law are seen to relate to the whole community and to do their work always with respect for the fellow citizens that they are there to serve. We may have come a long way since the dark days of Stephen Lawrence's murder in 1993 and the disgraceful, institutionally racist and negligent handling of that investigation by the Metropolitan Police. But the test of how far we've come, really come, isn't in warm words or abstract statements, but in the real lived experience of Black people on Britain's streets. And statistically, that means young Black men and boys in particular. So in a moment, I'm going to share a little bit of sadly all too common lived experience. This is a video of what happened to a 13-year-old in London just under a month ago.
Search him for? He's a kid, Wait, what do you need to search him for? Bro, no, I'm not talking to you. Don't touch me. Don't touch me. I'm not talking to you. Don't talk to you. Hey, he's a kid. Why are you holding the kid like that for? Listen, why are you stopping? No. Bro, I'm not touching you, so don't touch me. I'm not doing that. Ask him a question. Boss, you. Hey. Listen, no, why are you treating him like that? He's a kid. We've been watching you, and you saw it as well. He's a kid. No, bro, you're our age. He's 14 years old. No. I'm watching you. I saw how you're doing. That's why you're getting nervous. Nah, bro, what are you doing? Why are you holding like that? You're a bully, you know. Don't hold his head like that, bro. Relax, relax, relax. I'm telling him to relax. Right, relax, 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 relax. Let me help him. Relax, relax, relax.
Step back, step back.
Relax, bro. Nah, relax, bro. Relax, 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 relax. I'm not doing nothing. Relax, young man. Relax, relax. He's not resisting. He wasn't resisting. You're lying. You're lying. I saw it. I saw it. I've been watching all of you. You know he wasn't resisting. They put his hands on first. He had his back. You saw him. No, you saw it first. Come on. Bro, don't lie. He had his hands on the bike, yeah? And they put their hands on him first. They put their hands on first. No, you're taking liberties. You're taking liberties. We've been watching you and you saw that. He had his hands on the bike, yeah? And he was scared. He was scared.
I'll have a conversation with you.
Look at his hand. Look at his hand. Look at his hand. All right, cool. Bro, 1 second.
I'll have a conversation.
Go on. Kid, relax, 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 relax. Look at his hand. Relax, relax for a second. Relax for a second. Relax for a second. Relax for a second. Yeah, boss. He's gonna relax here. You need to your grip here. Let him relax a bit. Let him relax. He's scared. He's scared. Imagine that's your son. He's scared. He's 14 years old.
You should be searching him out. Why you going up his ass? Why you going up his ass? I just filmed it. I'll show you. No criminal that's got made so I'm right behind him.
Bro, we watch you.
I'm attracting bits and I've got it.
Bro. Alright, go on.
You had it. You search him. You search him. You let him go now.
So you let him go now?
Let him go. Get off me, bro. Get off me. You don't know me. Check my name. I'm a nah, you know.
Bro. Listen. Come. We saw that, you know. If you can't handle London, don't police in London. Wherever you came from, Constable Clue, don't police in London. Because I know you're nervous right now, and it's scary. But how you treated him, I saw that. Yeah, he had his hands on the back. He's 14 years old. You have a little brother. You have a son that age. So let me explain. Because I'm in the council, and I saw exactly what was going on.
Mate, do you want to chat me over here?
No. I want to chat to him, and I want to chat to him. Because how they saw it. Okay, cool.
You're not willing to say him like he's doing this. You are willing to engage. I'm willing to talk and engage with you. That's the thing.
Because it's hard, because I'm telling him relax here, because the way they're gripping him up there, he almost had his neck. If we went ahead, I didn't stop here, because I saw him, he's 14 years old.
Grabbing his neck.
You saw him went like his neck.
We often put handcuffs on it. Ultimately, it's my colleague's job to justify why they put handcuffs on. But they've done it, okay, in order to...
So, what did you notice when you just watched that clip? Maybe that all the officers were white and the boy black. Maybe that there were 5 of them, that they towered above and around him. They handcuffed and manhandled him while creating a human wall between him and the anxious members of the public who stopped to bear witness or intervene. Or perhaps you noticed that a black man was desperate to reason with the police about the boy's age. It was actually 13, not even 14. And to act as a support to the terrified lad, urging him to relax, no doubt having experienced the same treatment, possibly many times in the past. This is what the teenager in that film wrote about his experience, the experience that you've just viewed. I was on my way home, enjoying riding my new bike that I'd received, and suddenly I was thrown off my bike and against a wall for no reason. My first thought was, I haven't done anything wrong. Why are they harassing me? Is it because I'm black? Nothing was explained to me, and I was made to feel that I'd done something wrong, even though I knew that I had not. Nothing was explained to me as to why I'd been stopped. And I feel like they were abusing their powers, as normally they would tell you what you've done wrong. I was scared and worried because if there were no bystanders, who knows what would have happened. I've never had any interactions with the police before. After this experience, I hope I never do again, as I no longer believe the police are there to help, but more to harass young black boys for no reason. I've seen them doing this all the time, but for it to happen to me has shown that they enjoy harassing young black boys and expect every young person is a gang member or carries weapons. For me, watching that film for the first time was heartbreaking, as was reading the boy's testimony in his beautiful, neat handwriting. It made me think back to another clip from the United States earlier in the year, where an even younger child, a little girl of 5, was on a Black Lives Matter march with her family in Houston, Texas. It was early June, about 10 days after George Floyd's brutal killing. You've probably seen the images of her bursting into tears as she asks a white police officer in riot gear if he's going to shoot her and her family. He crouches down to comfort and reassure her. Even in this tense and difficult situation, he seems to have mastered the art, or perhaps it's the humanity, of what the great American essayist Malcolm Gladwell calls talking to strangers. But returning to the far less sensitive policing in the clip we've just looked at, it seems to me that a number of questions need to be asked about powers to stop and search without suspicion. Whether the blunt tool itself can ever do more good than harm, and if so, how such random, arbitrary, and in practice discriminatory power can be executed with far greater sensitivity. It seems obvious to me that to send mostly white police officers into areas with high minority populations, armed with broad coercive powers to detain even the young without reasonable suspicion of wrongdoing, is to risk the alienation of a whole new generation. And this, as if the media footage they must be consuming of racism, violence, and oppression from all over the world weren't alienating enough. At the very least, it seems to me high time that we amended our Equality Act to allow or even require some degree of affirmative action in police recruitment and deployment, so that the young people wielding the handcuffs look a little bit more like the younger people disproportionately forced to wear them. It would be good for communities and good for the difficult and often dangerous task of policing in an open society by consent. We live in dangerous and divisive times, not just in Britain, but all over the world. The virus has exposed and amplified every massive inequality on the planet and every historic injustice, every wrong still to be righted. The new far right, as terrifying as the one that began to emerge at this moment in the last century, is warming up with very similar attempts to foment culture war, divide and rule. I want no such war, just an open and reflective discussion about our history and our present, to appeal to people's innate sense of fairness rather than to play to their feelings of fear. I keep hearing that I must be more patriotic. and that is something that I'm happy to be. If that means pride in the Commonwealth, whilst acknowledging the more shameful episodes of empire, if that means refugee protection instead of hostile environments, if that means the rule of law upheld with an even hand, I'm patriotic about the NHS, the greatest experiment in social collaboration in human history, delivered by people of all races from all over the world. And one thing I've learned over many years of campaigning for rights, freedoms, and greater equality is that if I feel something so deeply, the chances are there are others who feel the same way. Special though we all are, none of us are quite so special as to really be alone, even if it often must feel that way on the early cleaning shift in the hospital, when subject to a coercive search on the street, or when shielding from the virus at home. As the legendary James Baldwin wrote in 1962 to his nephew and namesake about his own oppressors, you must accept them and accept them with love, for these innocent people have no other hope. They are in effect still trapped in a history which they do not understand. And until they understand it, they cannot be released from it. They've had to believe for many years and for innumerable reasons that Black men are inferior to white men. Many of them indeed know better. But as you will discover, people find it very difficult to act on what they know. To act is to be committed, and to be committed is to be in danger. But it seems to me, at least virtually here in Liverpool at the start of Black History Month 2020, if we share our commitment and act together, we need not face down the danger alone. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Shami. There's lots. The questions are coming in thick and fast, and I feel incredibly moved by that keynote speech. So thank you very, very much, and thank you for joining us this evening. I've got a couple of questions just to kick us off, and then, like I said, the audience have plenty of questions too. I'm going to just go back to the event we had yesterday, which was So We Marched, What Next? And Madeline, our co-director, asked what was different about the murder of George Floyd, what made this point in time, because obviously we'd had Eric Garner and the rest of it, and many others, countless, particularly in America, murdered by the police. But what made this different? And your point just brought up to me kind of a point that Douglas Murray made, it was actually last year, about the globalization of a specific American racial issue, so that this wasn't a British issue, that it was an American police brutality. And what it really made me think about was that, obviously with the pandemic, but George Floyd was killed by a knee on his neck. He wasn't killed by gun violence that we've come so aware, you know, or he wasn't shot, and so that for me is a real stark reminder to us across the world, even with gun laws, that Black people are being murdered by police, and that does happen here in the UK. And then you've got kind of the likes of Douglas Murray, who's going off kind of saying that, you know, that there was a Black Lives Matter protest, and how funny it is that they're walking along with unarmed police. How dangerous is that rhetoric to our public, and what can we, you know, that discourse, and what can we do to challenge that?
Well, we have to challenge it with our own experience and our own learning, because some people are, you know, some people are professional commentators and polemicists, but perhaps don't do as much listening or empathizing with the real lived experience of Black people in Britain, let alone anywhere else in the world. So to address his proposition head on, that this is just an American, police brutality or excessive police force or insensitive policing is just an American issue. Well, that's patently not the case. And there are images from all over the world. The lad in the clip I showed wasn't threatened with a gun, but I tell you what, he was pretty terrified anyway. They didn't need a gun, did they? There were 5 great big blokes, and he might be watching, so I'm not going to say he's a little boy, but he's certainly a youngster, and there was no way was that, in my view, proportionate. And you can do a lot. You can be very threatening, and you can actually do a lot of harm even without a gun. So that's the first thing. The idea that, as you said in your question, that it's all just about guns. Guns are an issue, and knives are an issue, and weapons are an issue, but proportionate force isn't just about whether you have a weapon or not. The second thing to say is that, of course, police forces are cooperating and sharing various restraint techniques, and you do sometimes see images from various places that show that there is a sort of symmetry in particular techniques. Now, if this knee on the neck thing is acceptable anywhere, I want to know why. And I think we're entitled to know. We need to examine what restraint techniques are used in relation to young people in particular, but all people in particular, because a restraint technique can do a lot of damage even without weapons being involved. And then, of course, there's the broader issue. To say that Black Lives Matter is just something that needs to be restricted to the US is like suggesting that slavery and the legacy of slavery and empire and structural inequality only exists in one country. That's patently a nonsense. And then finally, the pandemic. The pandemic, as I said in my talk, has exposed and amplified every yawning chasm of inequality on the planet, and it makes it worse. And it makes it more exposed. And so I don't think it's a complete coincidence that you had, yes, George Floyd was killed like so many other Black men, but it was in the pandemic, with Trump in the White House, with all of his, Trump isn't even using dog whistles anymore. He's using foghorns, right? So I think all of these factors came together and people said, no, we have to stand up. And we are an interconnected world. We're connected by this technology. We're connected by all sorts of things. It is a shrinking, interconnected world, and things that happen over there have consequences over here and everywhere. And I'm afraid that's the way it is. Internationalism isn't just for billionaires and their internet companies. Internationalism is also for people and their values and their struggles and their solidarity.
Well, 100%, and I feel like watching the debate with Joe Biden this week, that has an impact, and to think and to make a statement that things that are happening in other countries, particularly America, which is the leader, supposed to be the leader of the free world, that geopolitical soft power that it has, that infiltrates around the world. It's undeniable, and I wanted to kind of get your opinion and your thoughts really on what happened in that debate, in terms of basically Donald Trump giving, well, just basically saying stand down, and what was it, stand down and stand by, and all of this kind of rhetoric about politicians, and what are your thoughts on Trump and Johnson, because he's very
well, I just think it's been going on for longer than the debate, and you're right, it's not even just, Trump is an obvious focal point for this, but there are these strong men of the right in various countries at the moment, and why do I call people far right? This isn't just something that I just chuck at people I disagree with. What makes someone far right instead of just a conservative with whom I might disagree about lots of things. For me, it's that disregard for the rule of law. That's that disregard for for things like race equality and fundamental rights and freedoms, but crucially for the rule of law. When you've got somebody who says, well, even if I lose the election, I might not respect it because it'll be nonsense. Or, dare I say it, someone who says Parliament's getting in my way, maybe I'll shut down Parliament. For example, that would never happen in Britain, would it? That a government would illegally shut down Parliament and people would have to run off to the Supreme Court to get Parliament sitting. It's that disregard for institutions. Now, look, people on the left, myself included, want to reform institutions. I've just said I'd like to see the police have more black officers, and I think we should even be able to change. We should talk about changing the law to do that. But I believe in we need a policing institution. We just need it to be. We need it to be reformed. But I don't disregard institutions of our democracy, and crucially, not the rule of law. And that is the difference between a democrat and something very different. And that's what I think we need to worry about. This sort of power grab that once I've got the power, that's it. I don't play by the rules anymore. The rules don't apply to me.
Yeah,
I will do what I want for me and my rich mates and my business interests and whatever it happens to be. And I don't care what I unleash. I will let people do Nazi salutes when they're defending statues and shouting my name. I don't care, because it's just a naked power grab, as opposed to the sort of democratic politics that we are more used to, even if there are some people on that field that we might disagree with.
Well, and for me, it feels like post-democracy. Do you know what I mean? I feel like we're not really living in a democratic world at the moment. And I've just got a question that kind of, I'm going to go right in with one of the big guns here, but we don't hear the kinds of things you've been saying so eloquently coming from the Labour Party much at present, except for the odd black MP like Dawn Butler, especially when racially profiled themselves. Is this current Labour Party fit for purpose where these issues are concerned?
Wow, that's a corker, isn't it? Look,
right in there.
I think like any institution, the Labour Party needs to look at itself on race, and it needs to. There's no doubt about it. We need to do better. We need to be more inclusive, and we need to put our money where our mouth is. And when there are choices to be made, you don't have to throw protesters under the bus or black people under the bus to believe in the rule of law. I passionately believe in the rule of law. It just has to work for everybody. Everyone needs to be included in those institutions, and things like policing have to be done, in my view, more sensitively. And maybe some people would think that by showing that clip and having this conversation, I'm gonna be soft on crime, but I'm not soft on crime, and I don't believe that. I don't believe that being a critical friend of essential institutions like the police or the courts, for that matter, or any other institution, means that you're soft on crime. But Labour lost very, very badly last December, and it's going through, it's going through some ructions in the way that you do after you've had, it's almost like a bereavement. But yeah, I do think on these issues of race, we need to find our feet and a clearer, more coherent, less nervous voice.
It was this year that there's been the most ever black MPs that there's ever been in the Labour Party, isn't it? So maybe,
and that's great, and many of them young, and many of them women. There's always complexity, and some of them are just amazing. Some of the young black women in particular, I have to say, they just lift my spirits, and I think, if that's the future, then the future is bright, and there is hope.
Well, and for me, when we had the Black Lives Matter protest here in Liverpool, which was huge. It was an amazing thing to be part of, and actually the young black women were the drivers when they were speaking. They were out there. It feels like a real moment of uncovering and unpicking quite a lot of trauma. I think particularly, and I'm not speaking on their behalf, but you know that there comes a lot of trauma with this moment and kind of experience that. But there's a lot of anger, but they held it in and the way that they kind of focused that was just amazing, really. And I wanted to touch on social media. There's a couple of questions, so I'll try and kind of bring them in all together. One of them is about the kind of social media can bring the abuse and murder of Black people to a wider audience. How does the outrage we feel when watching these videos bring about real change in our judicial, political and media institutions? And then I've got another question about social media that I'll kind of follow on
Sure. With. Well, yeah, I mean, so social media and new media and the internet, it's a yin and yang thing, isn't it? Because we know that it can be very toxic. There can be a lot of racist bile and horrible stuff that's put out, and it can be a very, very scary place for people, a very damaging place for people. But equally, the other side of it is this great democratization that we can see images from all over the world of oppression or of struggle, or of people doing cool creative campaigning things, and we can be inspired. We can speak to people and join campaigns all over the world. So that's the positive side of it, you know. And I'm sure back in the day when the printing press was first invented, and people saying, well, this is dangerous, this is going to be all sorts of wicked people are going to be spreading dangerous ideas, there would have been that side of it. But equally, what an amazing democratizing thing. And you know, the internet, it's in my adult lifetime. And I do feel like I've lived through something that is the equivalent of the invention of the printing press. So what do you do with it? Well, there are all sorts of great examples that you see about what you can do with it. The way that people can build campaigns with specific demands. So everything isn't about Parliament. Parliament has its place, but you know, quite a lot of stuff has to happen outside Parliament too. That's whether it's in the community or whether it's in bigger masses of people in the country or internationally. You know, look at Marcus Rashford and his you know, school food campaign. Look, and there are so many campaigns like that. Not all involving famous sports people. There is this capacity to come together, and when the demand is just and it's deliverable, in a relatively short term, and enough people get behind it. We've seen, you know, we've seen the government, you know, flip flop on a few things. I mean, we've got to do some extra parliamentary campaigning because we have a government with a massive majority. Whatever party it was, a government with an 80-seat majority in our House of Commons has a hell of a lot of unchecked power. And of course, the pandemic makes it even, you know, less checked. And so I do feel that we need to use the tools at our disposal to build really smart, organised, specific campaigns as part of a broader people's movement for justice. And that's sustainability and fighting climate catastrophe. That's greater equality, including race equality and gender equality. And it's also peace. Because we wouldn't be having this terrible refugee crisis. We wouldn't be having a refugee crisis if we hadn't had, we didn't have an arms trade out of control, and we haven't had so much unlawful, inhumane military action that is the cause of these refugee crises in the end.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting for me, for social media, particularly as kind of as a white female. There's a lot of conversation, and I've had a lot of conversation with a lot of my friends about, you know, there was this huge push, everybody was supporting Black Lives Matter. There was the whole kind of the weird black squares, blackout that everyone kind of followed. And then my concern is, and I wondered what your opinion in it is, this particularly for white people, is that we can be seen to be supporting something, and we can be sharing things on social media, and we can be doing all of the right things, but actually the unconscious bias is still there. You know, it's about kind of, you know, affirmative and positive action. How do we kind of take that a step further on social media? How do we galvanize, you know, those communities, white people in particular, that seem to show up but aren't necessarily actually doing the work? Because it's fine to say I'm not anti-racist, but actually being anti-racist is challenging things on a daily basis. It's accepting that you are going to have to give up opportunities so that there's a fair and equal society. I just wondered what your opinions were on that on social media, because I think sometimes it can be seen to be something.
The first thing to say, and I have to say this at, you know, at the start of this, I'm a dinosaur, I'm a tin hatter, I'm not on social media.
Sorry, Shami.
I am not on social media. You know, at some point I made the judgment that for me at least, it would, you know, there was a bit of a world of pain that I didn't have to be part of, and that I was already of an age where I had other channels. Yeah. You know, I was already, you know, in a privileged place that I could make my voice heard and do my work and campaigning in other ways. Mm-hmm. But whether it's by social media or other means, when you talk about, you know, white people and feeling sensitive about whether you're just going to look like you're just coming to the party but not really participating in the struggle, I think the answer to that, it begins with listening. It begins with, you know, with having the conversations with your black and brown friends, you know, and do you have those friends, and are you going to those places? Are you listening, learning, reading, understanding that there's some human experience that you may not have directly, and therefore you have to do that learning. You have to, and you begin with that and from a place of humility and a place of genuine curiosity. And then, you know, through that process, hopefully you join movements for particular demands for timely change. You know, the reason I put my call for affirmative action in the talk is I wanted to leave people with a specific constructive ask, rather than just say all these terrible things are happening, look, isn't it awful, but you know, we've all done this together on a Friday night. I wanted to come up with at least one specific example of a thing that could be done, an amendment to a piece of legislation that could be campaigned for, and we could have affirmative action in police recruitment. And you know what? I believe that a lot of chief constables would probably be quite happy with that legislative amendment too, because they probably want to be able to go out and specifically recruit some young black officers to improve the you know, the complexion and reflectiveness of their service.
I would hope so, yeah. I've got a question here, but MPs who have received unconscious bias training, is there not an argument to say they're in breach of their job roles in refusing training by their employer deemed necessary to better carry out their jobs?
I don't know who's been refusing what, but I guess just from a personal point of view, I think that this stuff is always interesting, even if you don't think it. You know, these sorts of courses, and you know, I've done many of them over the years, and whether I've been skeptical or not, I think I'm just curious. I'm just interested. You know, I'm the sort of person that just wants to do that. You know, when I was a kid, I was always filling out those multiple choice quizzes in magazines and things. I want to explore. I want to explore myself and how I relate to other people and how we relate to each other. And I think even if people are skeptical, they should just go, well, what's the harm? Even if it's a bit of fun, even if I end up telling some silly joke about it, let's just experiment and explore. And if you think it wasn't a useful exercise, why was that? And again, doing it and talking to other people about it, talking to people of other races and other experiences and other classes and other genders about their experience of doing the same thing, just makes it more valuable.
Yeah, and I suppose, you know, again, but it's compounded, isn't it? You know, as an MP, you know, if say you're in the Tory party, let's say, and you are surrounded by people who look and act the same as you, you know, thinking you're going to assume that you don't have an unconscious bias.
Groupthink, group speak, and not just in the Tory party, in life, it is always an issue. We're humans, but we're still creatures. We still have certain, instincts to gravitate towards what we know and people like us and whatever. But what should make us special as human beings is this curiosity, this almost genius, really. We've dominated, in my view, we've dominated the planet, not always brilliantly, but we've dominated the planet for all these years because of that spark, because of that curiosity, but also because of our ability to work together. And I think the two things come together. So it's just, but when people get a bit relaxed in their privilege and a bit complacent, or alternatively they get really afraid, then it's easy one way or another to just kind of huddle together with people and what and really what we want to do. That's the difference between the culture war, which will be statues or no statues, which side are you on? We'll have our baseball bats and we'll see you in the street, or something a bit more like this, where we actually try to have it. I mean, obviously you and I are not really disagreeing, but to be able to have quite difficult conversations about all sorts of things, but to have them in a safer space, without necessarily calling people names or making them feel threatened.
And being able to get it wrong, I think, as well. I think that there's, I think that there's a lot of people I know.
I think that's right. I think that's relevant to your previous question about, I'm a white person, so I'm worried about getting it wrong. I think social media, from what I understand and read about it and hear about it, can be a pretty unforgiving place, because then you get more hits and get more followers and get more likes for the more controversial you are, and for really slamming somebody and so on. And I mean, we're on Facebook, now, and that's great that we have this technology, but a lot of companies are making a lot of money with models, with platforms that have almost been designed to marketize that rush, that adrenaline rush that comes from a bit of a fight.
Well, and it's even if we go back to what Trump and the data that was all through Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, that he was able, and that it's legal. That it blows my mind that he legally obtained data that now that allowed him to kind of know what people's voting was like, where they ate, what interests they had, and he compiled all this.
And there are questions to be asked about British politics too, in that regard. Not just the referendum, but elections and so on as well. And I'm not trying to say this to be a conspiracy theorist, because journalists and others have documented this stuff, but yeah, I mean, the real point is that the internet cannot be an ungoverned space, with these great big companies making billions essentially from our data. And our fears, and our,
and it feels like a human rights breach in some way, but it's not.
It is. Totally I think it's a human rights breach when data is harvested and we're manipulated on the basis of our data. I think it's a human rights breach if a young girl feels the need to self-harm or worse because of what she's seeing, and in particular when people that are young and vulnerable are being exposed online to things that we'd never want them to be exposed to in the real world. This line between the real and the virtual world is really interesting. I mean, in a way, again, the upside is that we get to have this, Liverpool's in lockdown, Britain's in a mess, but we get to do this event because of this great technology. But bad things get to happen because of this technology as well. And I guess it's just early days, but the technology has moved so rapidly in recent years, but the politics and the law and the regulation and the conversation about how to govern this ungovernable or ungoverned space hasn't really caught up. The internet's like the Wild West of the 21st century, and it's time to get some sheriffs in town.
No, I agree, and I think sometimes sharing things, people don't understand the trauma of that as well, and it feels like a scary space at the minute. I think sometimes not so much being online and in all of its capacity, but you know, Instagram and Facebook, it can very quickly, and how quickly people can turn on each other online, it's an interesting,
it's like,
daunting
I don't know, I mean, I've heard of bots and I've heard of, you know, that there's some people on there who aren't what they seem, but even let's assume that we're talking about real human beings who are actually there and not produced in Russia or somewhere else. Even in relation to real human beings, it seems to me, from what I've read and what I've listened, what I've heard from people, you know, who are younger than me and who are really active, it's like the gap between the thought and the word and the deed have got sort of shorter, and the gap is shorter and shorter and shorter.
It's instant.
And there's a sort of inhibition that's gone. You know, if we were in the pub, there's a thought. There'll be a world in a future when we'll be in a pub. In the pub, you might see somebody's, I don't know, clothing or the way that they look, and you might think a little nasty thought about it, or you might even mutter under your breath or to your mate, but you wouldn't possibly go up to the person and insult them.
No.
And yet there's so much kind of insult that seems to be, it's like, where is the filter? Where's the filter? It's like,
and you can just conditioning people into behaving a certain way, and I think that's what worries me about having.
Well, if it becomes acceptable, you know, then it's the norm. And of course, we're here to, you know, we're talking about, you know, Black people in particular. It's the Black women MPs who get the worst of it in terms of the politicians. Let's be clear about that. So there's particular buttons that are getting pushed. There are particular people who are enjoying the Wild West of the internet, as if it's, you know, reclaim our space. You know, we've lost this continent, so let's go and get that one.
A whole new one. I'm interested. I've been reading quite a lot this week about the Coronavirus Act and how kind of, you know, to kind of recap it, that it's been fast tracked again through Parliament, that there's, you know, it can stop protests, postpone elections, more easily detain and sanction people, and Black people are 4 times more likely to be sanctioned. 61%, and with that in mind, that 61% of refugees and people seeking asylum will have a mental mental health crisis at some point, which is completely understandable. It's going to it's making cuts to social care. I can't remember what it was that Johnson said. It was something we all had to make together. We all had to lose things together as a result of this. And only 6 Labour MPs voted against it, one being Rebecca Long-Bailey. But I just kind of wanted to get a little bit of your opinion on how this is going to impact us going forward, particularly for the Black Lives Matter movement and for Black and ethnic minority communities, and what your thoughts are on it, really.
Well, I think it would have been more people, you know, that there was all this sort of theatre about these Tory rebels who were going to defy the government because they didn't like the way that this was a power grab. I mean, so one of the big problems with, well, okay, so we are in a genuine emergency. I'm prepared to accept that, but I was prepared to give the government a lot more of the benefit of the doubt in March than I am now in October. Yeah, because I think they've squandered the goodwill in Parliament and a lot of the goodwill in the country. So imposing lockdowns but not sorting out testing and tracing, you know, expecting people to make these enormous sacrifices in terms of their mental health and their social life and not seeing loved ones, etc., but not actually standing beside people in terms of their finances, and just meeting in terms of their rent, in terms of their finances, in terms of their job security. So my problem with the coronavirus legislation is not that it's that you would throw out all of it, because sadly some of the things are necessary, because mass gatherings, we know from what happened back in the spring, are a way of, are potential hot houses for the spread. So there are times when you do need to make these interferences. My problem is that the act is lopsided. So it's powers to break up your picnics and break up your football matches or your protests, but where are the powers to go into the into the warehouse or the call centre, as I said, or into the building site, and make sure that people are in a safe working space, or to make sure that, you know, the bailouts for business don't just mean that people set up fake companies and get the government grants, but then sack all the staff or don't have any, you know. So it's kind of lopsided in the interests of certain people. And as I say, you know, when people were panic buying and other people were profiteering, and, you know, old people couldn't get food delivery slots, where were the powers to take control for a period of time of the food supply and distribution, to make sure that those food deliveries, those supermarket delivery slots, went to the people who needed them the most? You know, so the government interferes with individual liberties, but doesn't interfere with business interests, I'm afraid. And then the other objection that I have to the legislation is the way that it's cut Parliament out. It's back to the power grab. It's the government, it's the minister, it's the Secretary of State. They make their regulations, they do this, that and the other. And Parliament needs to have a more regular say. So to go back to your question, why did only 6 Labour MPs and so few MPs in general vote against the renewal of the Act, you know, the other day? It's because it was a job lot. It was a take it or leave it.
Yeah.
It's an up and down vote, renew or not review. And if you thought, oh, there's some bits of this Act that we need, because we can't have mass gatherings because we've got winter coming and it's already out of control again. If you were feeling worried about voting that down, you were stuck. Now, of course, people like Becky and Dawn Butler and others made the argument that it doesn't fall. There's 21 days for the government to come up with something new, but nonetheless, enormous pressure on MPs, because it shouldn't be a job lot, should it? The way that legislation should work is that MPs should be able to amend the legislation. They should have been allowed the other day to say, right, we don't like the Schedule 21 is a detention power in the Act. It allows police officers and others to detain people who are potentially infectious. Well, that's everybody, isn't it? And there's no test. It's not linked to, you know, somebody who's had a test or someone who refuses a test. They can just detain people potentially infectious. Every single one of the prosecutions they brought under that schedule has been unlawful. And yet that's still there. And MPs weren't given the opportunity the other day to vote that bit down. And equally, provisions that you mentioned in the Act to dilute the care standards for people who need care plans and so on. You know, a lot of MPs, certainly Labour MPs and probably some others too, think that needs to be taken out of the Act. But the way it's constructed, it's take it or leave it as a job lot.
Yeah, and you know, when you're talking about detaining people, that, you know, when you look at stats like black males are 9 times more likely to be stop and searched. This is going to affect the black and ethnic minority communities far more. And for me, I find it horrifying, really. And I think
it is a very, very scary piece of legislation. It would be scary in anybody's hands. Okay, it would have been scary in my hands. But the idea that this kind of legislation in the hands of Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings is something that we should be relaxed about is obviously not the case. I think they've had 6 months of it now, and they made an absolute mess, in my view. I feel much angry, and, you know, 6 months ago, I went to meetings with these people and I made my arguments for the safeguards that I wanted and didn't get all of them, but also for these other bits, you know, the bits that are left out of the lopsided stuff, and didn't get that either. 6 months later, they've wasted the spring and the summer. We're now heading for the autumn and winter, and there isn't testing. There isn't proper widespread testing available to people. And you know, I think the goodwill is beginning to, you know, to dry up. Now they've got their massive 80-seat majority, but those MPs in the end have to answer to their constituents. And I think if it's another 6 months and we're, you know, and we're no better off than we were, you know, last spring, I suspect that, you know, it won't be such a smooth ride.
And I think in terms of in some ways the pandemic has not helped, it hasn't helped anything, but it's elevated certain voices, and it's been, you know, like you said, a moment of mass pause has kind of allowed us to look at things like the death of George Floyd and really kind of get angry about that and really, you know, want to change things. And then on the flip side, I feel like some things are kind of being pushed under. So, you know, detention centres for people seeking asylum, what is happening in terms of people coming across to our country has always been quiet anyway. You know, most people aren't aware of kind of the Immigration Act or kind of how it even works to apply for leave to remain and all the rest of it. How do you see the impact of the pandemic on people seeking asylum and refugees in our country?
Well, obviously, it's incredibly dangerous. The pandemic is the most dangerous for the most vulnerable people.
Yeah,
that's just the way. That's the cruelty. Yeah. That's the cruelty of the thing. So, so it's, you know, so it's a very, very difficult time to be a refugee or an asylum. Any place of detention is going to be extra dangerous, whether it's a prison or a detention centre, which is effectively a prison, because of the close proximity of people and because of the poor diet and healthcare and all the rest of it. And also we're reading these newspaper stories that the government wants to you know, send people to oil rigs and islands, and you know, that is seriously off the scale. That's off the scale, inhumane stuff. So it's a terrible time to be a refugee or asylum seeker anywhere in the world, and you'd think that Britain would be better, or a little bit better, but I'm afraid under this government not. But one thing is clear. The NHS has just, you know, if anybody was in any doubt about the one thing that Britain should be most patriotic about, they surely can't doubt that. Now, they can't think that patriotism is about having wars and marching up and down. I mean, surely if this patriotism is about the NHS, and it's been undermined and under-resourced and compromised and privatized and marketized for years, I really, really hope that one thing to come out of this terrible time will be a reclamation of the NHS. And it seems to me that not just with the NHS, I'm talking too much, but when we come through this, there'll be no going back to January 2020, okay?
No.
There's no going back. Life isn't like that. So we either go forward to a more equal, sustainable and peaceful future together, or people will be saying, let's go back to 1920, right? Yeah. So what's it going to be? And I think, you know, we could, if we come together, be looking for something a bit more like a 1945 moment when people suffered through the Second World War and put up with all sorts of privations and loss of life and rationing and curfews and whatever. And on the other side of it, they wanted a fairer Britain, and that's what they got. And actually, a lot of people wanted a fairer world, and some people got a bit of that. And that's what we've got to. That's the ambition that we have to have. That coming through this crisis, and on the other side of this crisis, we're not going back to January 2020. We're going forward to something, you know, something much better.
I really hope so.
We have to make it so. And you're younger than me. You're the future. I'm sort of, you know.
I'm the future, Shami. Everyone's in trouble.
No, because we're all not at all. Because it's through coming together. Yeah. In community campaigns, in national campaigns, in international campaigns. Sometimes it's cases in court, sometimes it's bills in Parliament, sometimes it's marches on the streets. And I have no truck with people that think it's somehow illegitimate to even occasionally go in for peaceful direct action. It's the whole package of means of resistance and of struggle and of coming together. And I think, I say, look, the thing about lockdown is it makes you feel alone. But even in this terrible time, we're not alone. And that's why this word solidarity is such a magic word, you know.
Yeah.
It's a magic word. They have it in every language and tradition in the world. There's some kind of concept of, I don't know, fellowship or or, you know, this idea that when you know, we're in a bigger community, and it's not just the destination, it's the means of transport as well.
Yeah, and what a wonderful way to put it. And I do feel like that, and I think, you know, I think there are a lot of young people who kind of come out of this isolation and wanted to know, who wanted to make sure that their friends were okay, particularly around Black Lives Matter, and there felt to me that there was a sense of community. I've got a question from from Facebook that says, the left feels more fragmented than ever before. We don't seem to be able to unite behind a common theme. The right in the past 5 years has come together and seem more united in their interest. How can the left achieve a more united front to achieve aims that will lift people up?
God, that's a whole other event, isn't it? I do
it's come through about 4 times in different ways, so it's like,
yes, we do need to. We need less of this kind of, you know, People's Front of Judea and the Judean Front and all this red on red horribleness that I've seen in the last few years has been very, very depressing, and you know, as if the right-wing press, etc., aren't bad enough. When you see people doing it to their own in Parliament and beyond, that's very depressing indeed. But again, my hope is really in the younger people and the next generation.
I think I'm gonna just check. I'm gonna ask you one more question. I'm gonna check if there's anything else that's coming through. They're coming through quite thick and fast. My kind of final question would be, I reread an article you did for The Guardian about kind of poetry being political, and I wanted to get your idea of what the role is of the arts in all of this, in the Black Lives Matter movement, and just because it came up, it's coming up in lots of conversations. So, for example, LIPA, which is the Liverpool Institute for Performing Arts, gave out a statement that said, we've never commented on world events, every life matters. And I wanted to for me, straight away, I'm like, but isn't that what art does? Isn't that what art does? It comments on not just world events, but people's events and things. And isn't that the whole point of creativity? And obviously it flags up this idea of institutional systematic racism, but also is that not what the power of creativity is? And I wanted to know what your thoughts are, because I know you love poetry and the political, and how can the arts support?
The every life matters thing makes me a little bit nervous because of you know, where I've seen it online, and this, you know, but I don't know about that. Of course we know every life matters, but Black Lives Matter is about shining a light on a particular struggle that actually has a noble history going right back to the movement to abolish slavery. So it's not about saying every life doesn't matter. It's about saying we need to sometimes shine a light on particular continuing injustice. So I do, you know, find that kind of every life matters. If it's said as a response to Black Lives Matter, that's a little bit combative, actually. It's a political statement in itself, is the point.
Yeah, 100%.
So this kind of, when people say they're not being political, you know, often they are. Yeah. And you can't, and the arts and culture, it's all political. You know, the answer is just to be open and to be a democratic space, and to let people air differing views. The answer isn't to try to, if you squeeze politics and struggle and controversy out of the arts, you'll be squeezing the art out of the arts. I mean, what are you going to do? Just look at a white wall and a beautiful white wall and call it modern art, which you can, but you know, after you've looked at a few pieces like that, and some people would say even that's political because it's a white wall. Look, I understand people might be nervous. They might be nervous because of the complexion of the government and all the rest of it. But you know, I grew up in the 80s, so you know, I was reading and going to the theatre for the first time, and you know, in the 80s, the idea that movies and music and theatre and books aren't political is naive at best, and sinister and stupid at worst.
So that you are actively you know, we already know that there is a problem, particularly within our jobs, of representation anyway, and by making statements like that, there are less black students in university degrees. That making statements like that has a direct effect, whether you like it or not, because
well, I think sometimes people don't realise the significance of their words, you know. I mean, I said when I was talking about, you know, the gentleman who set up this new political party, and he's always putting all lives matter. That's lovely, that's beautiful universalist language. What could be wrong with saying all lives matter, except we know that you're saying it as an aggression. We know you're saying it because you somehow feel threatened by a conversation about race that makes you feel, I don't know, that someone's taking your space, or they're going to make you feel bad about a history in which some people, you know, have come out better than others. It's
it's about facing inwards, isn't it?
We've got to, but at the same time, I don't want to dismiss people that feel that way. I want to find new ways to reach out to them so that we can have this discussion, because, you know, because we don't do divide and it doesn't work for the left to do divide and rule. It's a right-wing trick. It's never going to work. But it's never going to work on the left, or even forget the left. It's never going to work for democracy.
And you're never going to change people's minds. I think sometimes if people have got that opinion, and it is more, I mean, obviously real far right, that's a different conversation. But
exactly. The danger is when the danger is if the real far right, which I do think is sort of on the march, is able through interconnecting networks to reach out to more and more people. And that's kind of what you've seen in the US. Yeah. And sometimes I feel we're in danger of seeing that in Britain too. And so, you know, we've got to, you know, be really smart and sensitive and bold and brave and articulate about talking about history, talking about struggle, making it clear that, you know, working people and ordinary people were oppressed by empire everywhere. You know, including in Britain, and ordinary people have so much in common, you know. So, you know, the overwhelming, so much of the world's wealth is held in so few hands. It really does boil down to that. And after this pandemic, it's going to be even worse, because you've read about the, you know, the billionaires becoming even richer, wealthier. And so at the end of the day, divide and rule suits some people. They might as well be gods on Olympus or on a spaceship, you know, on a Learjet sort of circling the earth. It's in everybody else's interests, I believe, to come to better understanding so that they can come together.
Yeah, and about education and you know, I feel like I could go on, Shami, and ask you another 150 questions, but I'll finish there. And I'd like to say a huge thank you. Your keynote speech was inspirational, and I've just looked at the time and realised I've been chatting to you for
ages. It's probably you and me left, Emma, but it's been great. Thank you so much, and you take care of yourself in Liverpool and everyone everywhere. You know, thanks for joining us and for being patient, and stay safe.
Thank you so much, Shami. It was lovely to have a question and answer and a good old chat about really important issues. So thank you so much. So this is only our second event of Black History Month. There is much more to come. That keynote speech and question, the kind of the Q&A afterwards has left me with lots of food for thought. If you've got comments or you've got any other questions, pop them in down. We can always email them on to Shami. But thank you very much. Apologies again for being a little bit late. Have a look at our programme at www.wowfest.uk. There's lots more to come. We've got the walking tours on Sunday if people are interested in doing that. We've got a great panel discussion about decolonising the curriculum that is on Wednesday the 7th of October at 7 o'clock with Dr. Leona Vaughan, Dr. Lucian Lowe and Daniela Obono. So please do have a look, tell us what you think. These events are completely free. If you'd like to donate, there'll be a link in the comments section now to support us to continue the work that we're doing. There's also a monitoring form. We never let you get away with that, but it does let us know that we're doing the right kind of events and working with the right kind of people. So please fill out one of those if you get the chance. I've been Emma. I'm the programme manager at Writing on the Wall, and I hope you all have a lovely weekend. Stay safe. Thanks a lot.